Yes, now we are joined by Ermelinda Malcotte, an international analyst. She's joining us right now in this special broadcast to talk more on the importance of what we just witnessed today on this victory of Cuban diplomacy at the United General Election. Let's welcome Ermelinda Malcotte. Welcome, Ermelinda.
Hello, thank you very much for inviting me to speak about such an important subject.
You know, it's always a pleasure to have you with us. Ermelinda, we just saw the vote, 165 votes in favor, 12 abstentions, 7 against. Tell us, what is the importance, what is the impact of this diplomatic victory that Cuba just achieved at the United Nations General Assembly?
Well, it's at the same time a great victory, and this, because of course we can see how efficient and well received is the Cuban diplomacy, and that diplomacy is a solidarity diplomacy. So we see that Cuba has always friends in the world that will always, I mean, it has been decades since in the United Nations votation are highly in favor of Cuba, and it's also in recognition of the illegality of the blockade against Cuba. So this is very huge achievement. And on the other hand, of course, it has been decades that the same vote has been occurring in the United Nations. So we know that it's not sufficient to end the blockade, but still it is a very great diplomatic victory, and it really expressed the fact that Cuba has the support of a lot of countries, but we need to do more to end the blockade, unfortunately.
You were saying we need to do more. What needs to happen in the world, in the international community, for the United States finally hearing what the international community demands from them and brings an end to this unjust policy of blockade?
Well, I think that United States will never hear that question until they really have some kind of revolution, because it's impossible for them to hear that. So what would change the situation for the blockade, what would end the blockade, is the fact that the multipolar world would develop and would be such an important institutions that the blockade would not be that much important for Cuba. I think that is the main thing. When we remember when Cuba was integrated into the Comecon, which is the common market of the Soviet Union, Cuba has a very high development. Blockade was active, and they were under lots of sanctions, but the Comecon made that Cuba had a huge economic growth. They had developments in all kind of fields, and it was very, very good for Cuba. So really the question is not will United States understand that they have to stop the blockade, because they would never, because they're an imperialist country, and until that changes they would not listen to it. But we have to point out that the multipolar world that is developing will be something that would
Merlin,
not
I'm sorry
end the
to
blockade,
cut you short, but we have to go to the UN because the Cuban delegation is offering statements after the vote. Let's continue speaking with Ermelinda Malcotte, who was sharing with us her ideas on this important victory. So Ermelinda, I wanted to ask you, we heard the Foreign Minister, Bruno Rodriguez, denounce the real purpose behind why this policy really exists, which is pretty much to bring about suffering to the people, to force people out of that suffering to a social outburst, and therefore bringing down the constitutional order and forcing a regime change that is not being asked for by the Cuban people. So what can you tell us, seeing this project from this perspective?
Well, yes, it has been exactly the objective of the blockade. It has been expressed as make the Cuban people hunger and desperate, and hoping that it will bring what they call a regime change or a counter-revolution in Cuba. And it has to be stressed that if you look, for example, at Iraq, Iraq has been subject to very high sanctions, and which resulted in the death of 5,000 people each year, so half a million persons. If it has not been the case in Cuba that so many people died as they did in Iraq, is because Cuba has dedicated its whole state and government has been dedicated to help the people. It's a social state, it's a socialist state, so the public services have always been here for alleviate the sanctions and the blockade for the population. So this is how the Cuban government has always worked is to make people suffer the less possible from the sanction, but the objective of the blockade was to make people hunger and desperate. So this is completely the objective. And as the ambassador of the United Nations from Cuba has expressed, we have reached now a situation where infantile mortality has raised in Cuba. Lots of health indicators in Cuba are on the same level of health indicator of highly developed countries like European countries. But now the blockade is so strong and so difficult for the Cuban population that yes, we have seen some of those indicators of infantile mortality raising up, which is very dramatic. But still, the United States has never reached the objective they have, which is regime change, because people don't want to be subjected to what the United States wants for Cuba, which is going back to the Batista period exactly. So people doesn't want that.
Thank you very much, Ermelinda, for always sharing your inputs with her and for having time to speak with us here in teleSUR English.
Well, it's always a pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
It's always our pleasure, as we were saying.